Let me make a distinction for you. Regarding the Middle East, we're struggling in the West to understand things like Islam and the Arabic Middle East. I'm of course not a specialist on that area, but there are some common things to think through. And that is specifically the role that Islam plays in the Middle East. And there's a lot to be said about that, which I'm not going to talk about at the moment. But the idea that Islam is not a religion the way the West thinks of it as a religion. We think of religion in our own Judeo-Christian sort of heritage as a belief of psychoepistemology. In other words, we have a psychological awareness that is the way we believe. So we feel repentant. It's usually very internal. It's a sense of self awareness in front of God and who I am individually. And because psychology or the psyche is the center of our religion, it's a very individual experience because my psyche is mine and I'm responsible for what I believe. I'm not responsible for what someone else believes. And because of that, there's in the Western world we have this church-state separation, which is really not new to America. I mean, in a sense it is, but in another sense it's not. It's been part of the Western heritage since the end of the Roman Empire. Pope Gelasius in the 6th century really talked about two swords, the state and the church. And the church is over the consciences of men, and the state is over the body of men. And so, in our dualist sense, I have a mind and a spirit, and that mind and spirit are mine, and I take that directly to God. And God deals with me on that level through the church and the sacraments and the preached word, where my body belongs to the state, the physical environment. That divide's been very central to Western Christianity since its founding. But Islam doesn't work that way. It's not a psycho-epistemology. It's a behavioral epistemology. In other words, acting is believing. For Judeo-Christians, believing is when you say belief, you're thinking of a heart, a mind, an internal action, where you're convinced of something. And so you can even do the right thing in Western thinking for the wrong reasons. So I can go out and help a poor old lady, but I'm hoping someone else will see me, and I will divide those motives, am I being right, and that kind of thing. Because that's where our religion is housed, in that moment, in that internal conscience, in that psyche. But for Islam, the Middle East, it doesn't function that way. It functions as action. So believing is action is belief. And so the more you act is the more you build up conviction and being convinced of it. And so the religion is not to guide the conscience. The religion is to guide the whole person, the body, really. So that Islam is not a religion of faith per se. It's a religion of politics, right? It's a religion of the body. It's how I act. It's the state. So there's no separation of church and state in the West, in the East, like there is in the West. There's no sense that religion belongs to one sphere and then politics or economics to another. These things are a whole for them. Albert Hourani writes a book on the intellectual development of Islam in the 18th century. His introduction is fabulous. It coincides very nicely with Bernard Lewis's History of the Middle East, and also Islam in the West, where those two, Hourani and Westham, do a fairly good job of defining this religion as a political reality. You can't separate the body exercising in politics and in society separate from your religion. Those are the same thing. So a state law, which they call Sharia in the Middle East, is in fact religion. You wouldn't say in the West, you'd say, oh, well, Sharia is religious law, and then there's political law. No, in Islam, those are the same thing. And because epistemology and faith belong to the body and activity, then you have to be able to exercise them out in the state, in the economy, in society, or it's not really true Islam. Now, there are different interpretations of what true Islam requires, and that's in another video where I discuss the difference between what we would call radical and moderate Muslim, and there's some thoughts on that. But that's where we would make that distinction usually, is we would say, well, if you want to force your religion into the public square, why then you'd be a radical. That's not true. For Islam, all religion belongs in the public square and in government. Now, how much of the teachings of the Quran belong there, and more importantly, if you're really talking about Islamic theology, how you interpret the Quran to have influence in society. In other words, for someone on one extreme, you allow only the religious scholars and the direct word of the Quran to govern your society, and the scholars to think that way. In another version of Islam, you allow what they call ijtihad, is the idea that reason, that you can interpret the Quran with reason. But in both cases, you don't have true Islamic faith. You don't have true Islam unless it's also governing the society from top down. It's not a matter of just internal religion. So we have to be careful when we talk about what Islam is, that we don't force it into Western Judeo-Christian categories, because it really doesn't quite belong there.